Last week, Roger began this short series of reflections inspired by an appeal made at the 7th Congress of Leaders of World Religions and Traditional Religions, which met in Kazakhstan earlier this year. As the appeal unfolds, the focus moves from our tumbling world to an enduring hope. In the words of the appeal, in this world situation, we are looking for forces to help face fear and the challenges with courage. This cannot be achieved by promising security. Trust alone encourages finding hope and taking action. The more pressing the world situation is, the more hope the world needs. It's only because of this that those responsible and the people do not lose confidence that the great challenges can be mastered. How you feel about hope likely depends on your own experiences and your own circumstances. Hope has been portrayed both as salvation, the thing that will rescue us all, and delusion, the thing that will destroy us, and everything in between. An important criticism of hope is that passively feeling hope may give us an excuse to do nothing, to just stand idly by, waiting for others to do what we don't want to do or feel like we can do. Meanwhile, we can also get lost in an imaginary future, postponing our personal and collective well-being to some other time or some other plane of existence. We can even use our hope as an excuse to avoid facing difficulties, from those places in ourselves that need healing to the unhealthy situations around us in our communities that need to be addressed. This pie in the sky kind of hope can too easily just become a practice of accommodating injustice and oppression. As Joe Hill observed, it also makes you an easy mark for religious hucksters looking to get your money and your labor. On the other hand, we can hold so tightly to a specific version of hope that our expectations become basically a cage for us. Attachment to outcomes can stifle our flexibility and creativity so that we miss out on real opportunities for change. As some psychologists have put it, expectations are just premeditated resentments. Or we might find ourselves caught in a trap called false hope syndrome, with unrealistic goals. When this is the case, it doesn't matter how much confidence we have or how much energy we pour into our efforts. Distorted beliefs doom those efforts to failure, no matter how many times we try. We end up devoting time and resources into what is essentially a lost cause, and that makes it easy to get stuck and discouraged. And then there is the difficult reality that sometimes we don't need to hope so much as we need to grieve. We need to come to terms with the state of our lives, families, communities, and world. Sometimes what we call hopelessness is really just honesty. And this is what makes navigating hope and hopelessness, grief and despair, rest and apathy, action and futility, something more like an art, a craft. It's also why the words don't always fit, because we're often at different places on this messy spectrum of grieving, healing, acting, or even giving up. But behind those differences of experience and perspectives, there are questions that can be useful to most of us that relate to hope. What is it that keeps us from giving up, from giving in, from standing idly by while honestly facing the devastating challenges of the day? What are some principles and practices that help us transform our anger, our grief, and despair into something meaningful, into acting in meaningful ways? To revisit a psychological perspective, and as part of preparing for these reflections, I took the Snyder Adult Hope Scale. And the scale conceives of hope in terms of two qualities. First is agency, that is, how we direct energy toward a goal. And the second is pathway, that is, how we plan to reach that goal. And I thought, well, this is really practical, right? This is a practical approach that can help us avoid getting caught in those ways that hope can go wrong and make things worse. These are skills that we can work on, how we direct energy toward a goal and how we plan to get there. Those are habits that we can form. And sometimes hope may just be the resolution to keep taking small steps, even when the outcomes are unclear. Sometimes I think hope is finding a resource or support that keeps the possibility of change alive, that keeps that door propped open so that we can see there's a way forward. As it turns out, this particular scale, the Snyder Adult Hope Scale, ranked me as a person with high hope. And to be honest, I was a little surprised by that. I was bracing myself for a different outcome. And it was interesting to me because it touches on all those tender places inside of me where despair, rage, and grief still live. I would not describe myself as a hopeful person as much as a stubborn person, a persistent person. But seeing the connection between those two in this context, between hope and persistence, has helped me be more intentional about exploring what nurtures that energy and persistence. It's something in me like a vow to not give up, not to give in to actions that undermine the long-term health of myself, others, or our communities and movements for change. I've known for most of my life that I depend on my spiritual and reflective practices to keep me steady in a very unsteady world, to help me consistently engage with people and processes in the midst of difficult and painful circumstances. And that's why I've felt most at home over the years in Quaker and Buddhist contexts. And that's why I've spent so much of my time teaching and practicing skills like meditation and mediation. I would also include staying in touch with creativity and beauty as vital reflective practices. I've always relied on singing, poetry, and humor to carry me through. Here we can gather words and sounds and images together in ways that allow us to recognize and heal ourselves and one another. It's not automatic or inevitable that that'll happen. It's something we have to do on purpose. As David Whyte has beautifully written in his poem, Sweet Darkness, you must learn one thing. The world was made to be free in. Give up all the other worlds except the one in which you belong. Sometimes it takes darkness and the sweet confinement of your aloneness to learn anything or anyone that does not bring you alive is too small for you. The difficult news that we know all too well is that what David Whyte is describing there is beautiful but not simple. The good news is we know it is possible. In studying the history of people and movements, it's easy to miss this lesson. But if we're willing to stay with those tough stories, we find not only the oppressors, but those who resist oppression. We find not only those who hurt, but those who heal. We find not only those who go along with the cruelty of the world, maybe even profit from it, but we find those who do not. And all along the way, we find artists and creatives who give voice not only to the pain, but to the great insistence that things do not have to be this way. And if we continue to act, will not be this way forever, because we will do the work to make those changes a reality. In 1993, Carolyn Forshade edited what became and remains one of my personal favorite collections of poetry. It's called Against Forgetting, 20th Century Poetry of Witness. It beautifully and achingly bears witness to extremity, to all the horrors of the 20th century's wars, torture, exploitation, exile, and oppression, and the voices of over 140 poets from all over the world, from the Armenian genocide to the tragedy of Tiananmen Square. And one of those poets was Otto René Castillo. He was a celebrated poet in Central America, but that did not save him from exile from his home in Guatemala for his work as a student organizer. As a side note, that first exile was in 1954, and it was the result of a CIA-backed coup that overthrew the democratically elected President Arbenz. Arbentz's great crime was to advocate for agrarian reform policies that provided compensation and redistribution of land to exploited and impoverished laborers, many of whom were indigenous. The United Fruit Company didn't like this plan. They had much to lose, and they lobbied for the U.S.-backed coup, which happened, and they intervened. When Castillo secretly returned to Guatemala in 1964 with an insurgent group, he was arrested, brutally tortured, and killed. But his witness remains. His witness was not an idle one, nor did he stand idly by. He wrote about the apolitical intellectuals who refused to act when they were most needed. In this poem, he says, "No one will ask them about their dress or their long siestas after lunch or about futile struggles against nothingness or about their ontological way to make money. They will be asked nothing about their absurd justifications nurtured in the shadow of a huge lie. On that day, the humble people will come and they will ask, 'What did you do when the poor suffered, when tenderness and life were dangerously burning out in them?'" Castillo also knew the uselessness of that pie-in-the-sky hope that substitutes platitudes for grief and rage, as he wrote in Distances. "Under the bitter December air, a friend says, 'I'm disillusioned. Everything goes so slowly. The dictatorship is strong. I'm desperate and pained by the calvary of my people.' And I, sensing his anguish, the gray and noble sadness of my friend, knowing his fight to keep on fighting, do not say, 'Coward,' or 'Go to the mountains,' or 'Lazy,' or 'Pessimist,' 'Rigid,' 'Poor devil.' I only put my arm around his shoulder so that the tearing cruelty of his cold be less." Yet Castillo's voice is most clear to me in his simple poem, Before the Scales, Tomorrow. And when the enthusiastic story of our time is told for those who are yet to be born, but announce themselves with a more generous face, we will come out ahead, those who have suffered most from it. And that being ahead of your time means suffering much from it, but it's beautiful to love the world with eyes that have not yet been born, and splendid to know yourself victorious when all around you it's all still so cold, so dark. This might be my favorite description that I've encountered of what hope feels like inside of me. Being ahead of your time means suffering much from it, but it's beautiful to love the world with eyes that have not yet been born. Cruelly and tragically, Castillo never got to see that world with any other eyes, but his work and his art help make change possible and can help keep the possibility of change alive in us as well. When I was rereading this poem, I remembered a guided meditation I offered at a local Transgender Day of Remembrance in 2021. I envisioned it as a way to get in touch with our bodies and feelings, to reconnect with our community and aspirations, and recommit to working together to create a world where justice, equity, and joy are the norms. It turned out, a concrete expression of loving the world with eyes that had not yet been born. We began with a deep sense of loss, making space for bearing witness to our collective and personal suffering. Each time we gather like this, I said, we can't help but remember the world we live in. It is a world that makes it very clear that we are misunderstood and unwelcome. And that loss is in stark contrast to the possibilities that we can feel within ourselves and that we witness in our friends and loved ones and people around us. We live beautiful, vibrant, and even joyful lives when we have a chance to do so, and we exist in the face of all this violence, hatred, and grief. and instead insist on living, loving, and thriving, we create new worlds. Holding that pain while also making space for what is possible, that is the task of each moment. The practice I suggested then was to reconnect with 3 intentions. First, we affirm and love ourselves. We can take a deep breath and remember a time when you or another person affirmed who you are, just who you are, your humanity, your possibility, all the capacity for love and joy, and who welcomed you without reservation and didn't make you hide yourself. Knowing that gift, we can offer the same affirmation and love to ourselves and to everyone around us. Second aspiration was to care for each other, elders, youth, and everyone in between, to cherish our history, to honor our elders, to celebrate our youth, to care for each other, and to call to mind our ancestors who walked this path before us and who also dared to be themselves. And finally, we take space in the world. We don't let it pass us by. We know the world we need is possible. We're not asking every week after week. We're not asking for anything outrageous or impossible. We're asking for a world where we feel and are safe, dreaming of a world where we can easily access medical care, housing, food, employment, and enjoyment that we need just to live simple, beautiful human lives. We know it's not unreasonable to demand a world where we get to decide what supports our well-being and where all people are free and equal. So we affirm and love ourselves. We care for each other, and we take our space in the world. We hear and honor our grief, anger, and fear. We also hear our community's passionate insistence that for all the good things that support our well-being. We hold both with fierce determination. And that's the kind of energy that can carry and sustain us as we continue to work together to create a world where everyone, without exception, can live with freedom, safety, and joy. And this is what I take David Whyte to mean when he wrote, "Give up all the other worlds except the one to which you belong. And to learn anything or anyone that does not bring you alive is too small for you." This is what it means to me when Otto Rene Castillo powerfully teaches us that being ahead of your time means suffering much from it, but it's beautiful to love the world with eyes that have not yet been born. After all these explorations, I still don't know if I know what hope actually is. I don't know if I understand and can define it. But what I do know is that I can commit to cultivate compassion and wisdom without giving up, without getting lost in premeditated resentments or false hopes. I can practice affirming and loving myself, offering and receiving care, and taking space in the world so that others can glimpse just the possibility that everyone, without exception, can live with freedom, safety, and joy. Maybe this is what hope is, or maybe this is as close as someone as I can get to hope. We know how exhausting it is to keep trying, but we also know that if we give up completely, there's no possibility that change will ever happen, that growth will ever happen. So let's put our arms around each other's shoulders in those times of disillusionment and despair, give up all the worlds that fail us, and keep insisting on loving until this world is able to love us back. Thank you.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.